Hey everybody, it's your girl Elizabeth Mays, co-host of The Creative Voice with my teammate right next to me.
I'm Danny Wu, also here at The Creative Voice, and today we have a really special guest.
We do. But first, before we jump into that, I want to tell everyone a little bit about what The Creative Voice is. We are a podcast that focuses on telling the stories of creatives, covering interviews, fireside chats, events, and appearances. Well, all in all, we really just want to deep dive into the practice of creatives, whether that's an architect, whether it's a designer, whether it's a curator, whether it's a maker. Our job is to sit down and have candid conversations and talk about who they are, what they do, and I'm sure that our audiences, whether it's local or globally, have a better idea on a lens in Detroit.
Absolutely.
We have people ask us all the time, like, hey, can you cover Toledo? Can you cover blank blank? And we're just like, we got so much content in the city of Detroit. Why go anywhere else?
I mean, we'd love to be invited to places to cover, but we also recognize that Detroit has so much talent without necessarily the amplified voices that we could give them.
100%. So I'm going to do the pleasure of giving the bio. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So in the studio, we have Jon Dones, artist, DJ, and creative strategist. For over 20 years, Dones has built an interdisciplinary and future force that bridges the gap between creativity and business. A cultural cross-trainer with a specialty in building brands. His vision, expertise, ingenuity, and the ability to forecast the near future having been applied in many facets of the cultural industry, from the art world, fashion, filmmaking, design, automotive, nightlife, music, social impact, and advertising. In 2011, he distilled the breadth of his experiences into founding Studio Teal, an award-winning brand design and strategy consultancy, which we will talk about in this episode. While his deep understanding of brand development comes from having built dozens over the years for clients, but also from firsthand growing and building his own, which is essential. In 2007, him and his creative partner, Ash, founded Detroit's most vibrant and expressive nightlife institution, also known as H2D. Love to say that. Producing over 300 events, including packed and sweaty nightclubs, secretive soirees, and unexpected locations, festival activations, and events for prestigious institutions including the DIA, MoCAD, Design Core Detroit, MoPop, Red Bull Arts, Ghostly International, MGM Grand, among others. More than a party, Hot to Death has reigned as an internationally respected and locally coveted social center of gravity that has built a sum larger than its part, tight-knit community from the city's creatives and entrepreneurs.
That's a huge list.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah.
Damn,
well, Jon, that's a mouthful.
It is.
We're really excited to have you on the show, and hopefully we did justice to that bio read. Personally, I think the context of inviting Jon onto the show is largely because of Hot to Death. I think my experience came from just attending those parties and kind of through the CCS network, finding out that you guys have such a huge presence now. And I really feel impressed by the growth and the change that's happened over the years in the city. But I also wanted to just kind of touch in on who you are as a person first before we get into all things Hot to Death. So as someone with photography and advertising experience, how does that skill set support projects that you're on? You just did a brand strategy workshop on brand essence, featured one of my favorite topics, wrestling. Could you give us a little taste of what Studio Teal does?
Yeah. So you asked, like, oh, how does this advertising stuff translate into your own brand stuff?
Yes.
Really, my practice went the other way around.
Okay.
Yeah. So my career started out in photography. I studied photography at CCS. And what I kind of learned once I actually got into the actual advertising world was that alongside my photography, I was always selling strategy. I would ask the kinds of questions that were, who are we trying to reach? What kind of aesthetic? Like, what your competitor? All these kinds of questions that I just thought about as a creative person, something for a client. And all that process isn't terribly different than starting an art project. You're thinking about, what do you want this to say? What are you trying to express? What kind of way do you hope to make people feel? And so these kind of ways of thinking were just sort of embedded in how I approached creativity in general. And when Ash and I started Hot to Death, we asked ourselves a whole litany of different questions. You know, what art movements are we trying to align ourselves with? If Hasadeth was a international cities, what international cities would we like want to play at? You know, what kind of you know, if Hasadeth were like a box in the middle of an infinite desert, what is our box? Well, we decided we're a handbag in the middle of an infinite dance floor.
Yeah.
And so the workshop you mentioned actually was based off of those early conversations Ash and I had together in creating what we wanted to do with Hasadeth. That was our way to sort of communicate what we wanted to create together. We'd both been involved in throwing art shows around the city in different alternative spaces, and been going to parties, Dorkwave and Untitled and a bunch of other parties that were on the scene back then. Those were kind of like our social coming of age in Detroit kind of moment. So it meant a lot to us to throw our hat in the ring, kind of, you know. And so our collaboration really started like happening. So when I got into the advertising world, eventually I had a partner in the agency who was in strategy, and I was like, "What do y'all do?" Because like I'm in the creative department,
Right.
I'm kind of new here. I don't know anything. I'm so green. And I did know things. I knew a lot more than I thought I did, but I just didn't have the jargon. I didn't have the language, and have it was just like a million things that I was like little apps, you know. What's that mean? Look that up. Ask someone about this later. That kind of thing. And then, you know, learning what the strategy department did and learning how, you know, at least in that org, the strategy and creative didn't have the best communication skills, didn't have the best like way of adopting strategy or communicating strategy, didn't have the best way to communicate strategy to creatives.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time and a lot of years brief writing, or at least critiquing and giving feedback on briefs that were written clearly by the business side and account people who understand a marketing strategy from the business goals or objectives, but they didn't really understand what is a creative person looking for in the ask that they can latch onto to start exploring themes, imagery, words, music,
discovery phase,
everything. And that discovery phase takes a while, because what you're really relying on, and I'm assuming from your experience too with working with them, is that they really need to give you an insight into what that audience is trying to do and what you're trying to solve for. Whereas I think a lot of times people assume our vocations are like smoke and mirrors. They also assume that a strategist is just a highly overpaid consultant. I sometimes agree, but other times I feel like the reality is that we spend a lot of time translating. So I appreciate you kind of making that point. The other thing that you mentioned was that started out as kind of an arts project and like the first really serious collaboration with Ash. Detroit's a really small town kind of vibe. How has that really helped you into other things that you do now as a creative person? So the cooperative art studio space that you have, Matterfruit, and then also What FM.
Well, Detroit always had a small town feel. It's
definitely
a big city with, you know, an intimately connected community.
Very tangible.
And I think part of, you know, what it lacks is industry infrastructure, arts infrastructure, those types of things. So you have to create it, you know, and part of Detroit being a small town feel, or like a big city with a small town feel, whatever you want to call it, like the intedness of Detroit, is that you can make that impact. You can have that idea and get some people together and start making it happen. And so you mentioned like Matterfruit, which is the cooperatively owned future cooperatively owned artist studio space. That's been a couple of years in the works. We're getting kind of close on being able to acquire a building. We're looking at properties right now.
That's super sweet. That's exciting.
Yeah. So who's a part of this?
A bunch of us. You know, I think loosely around 20 of us that are involved, and more tightly about 9 to 12. We meet every week. What I was going to say is you can have an impact. Detroit is this interconnected place. You can have an impact. For the most part, things are relatively accessible still. Things have changed so much in the last 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
And things aren't as accessible. Things aren't as lawless. I feel like the city's kind of in a puberty mode where there's a lot of overcompensation that like has made some of the stuff harder to do than it used to be.
Downtown has a new haircut.
Downtown's got a haircut and a whole new, those shoes are real clean and whatever, but no, you can have an impact, So, and one thing that I'm really cognizant of, having been a creative here for this long, I moved downtown right after high school.
Right.
2003.
Fresh.
So it's been 20 years. I've seen a lot change.
Right.
The thing I haven't seen necessarily change is that while there's been a lot of this Detroit creative hotbed narrative floating in the ether and hitting the headlines, very little, in my opinion, has actually changed the plight of being creative.
Yeah, and that's also what you were talking about in terms of actually giving us structure and infrastructure, specifically about why we don't have that kind of artist representation here in the city, even though we do have collectives. So like Playground Detroit does a lot of work. We have stuff with like Library Street. We have independent upstarts that have been trying to move their way in, but we're very siloed in that approach. So it's been kind of a struggle. But with What FM, is that like something where you want to broadcast more opportunities? Is that like a...
Yeah. So I kind of, I think there's 3-4 things that we're pointing at here. Cost of Death is like social infrastructure.
Right.
That's where people can meet in the cover of night with a couple of drinks and music and a spirit of generosity. Matter Fruit is literal space where we can cohabitate and create together and have sort of a collective intelligence of a community in a physical space. And then What FM is the radio station that is that starting with a bunch of friends is sort of that media component. It's kind of maybe what I'll say the first stepping stone in a larger ambition towards a media project. And so, being a DJ, being in the sort of design sphere, the intellectual sphere, whatever you want to call Detroit's creative ecosystem, there's so many great voices here, super talented musicians and presenters. This is just a platform to give a sense of Detroit's personality, at least our corner of it. And I'm saying all this stuff like Detroit is it's a small town, but it's a big place. I can only represent my corner of, and I there's a lot of great corners, a lot of great little pockets of the city, but, creating the infrastructure and the space and the application and the social connection for, I really like the term constellation, I feel like there's a lot of really bright, shining, luminary people that, you find in association with in your little corner of the Detroit social universe or whatever. So I'm just trying to make the things that will allow for a more prosperous vision for the people.
One thing that really stood out to me, and I think I can attest to this, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people will as well, but I want to hear from your perspective, is when I walked in, there was like this certain energy, this like very positive, collective, excited, well-versed energy in that room. And you brought together a number of different creatives from different walks of industries. And just being in that room, I was just like, man, he's got something special.
It's the influence,
about him.
Right?
It's the influence.
Yeah.
But what would you say it is that you're bringing to these spaces that is consistent, regardless of the project that you're working on, that sets you apart, not necessarily from other people, but sets you apart from what it is that you're bringing to the city of Detroit? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I feel like that's a question that I think other people would probably have more to say about than me, because I'm in the middle of it. Like, you observed that, and I feel very honored to be seen that way. And I appreciate that's a deep compliment. And the energy, I will say you're right. The energy in that room was so electric. And to be a little transparent, none of us knew how that event was going to go.
Oh, okay.
I felt that because I wasn't attending the event, but I also like saw how that event was promoted, and I was like, wow, this is really underground. Okay, this is very CCS. To me, it felt like I was like, oh, okay, so we're really trying to get people to get excited about something. Then we know that we're forming it as we're talking it through.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to see that happen.
So you said that you didn't know how.
Yeah. And first of all, it's like a different kind of program,
Yeah.
meaning we were doing a mock. So the event itself was not a launch.
Right.
It was like an invitation to collaborate, you know, like, because the radio station isn't launched yet.
Right.
We are still working on it. But we wanted to do something that would raise some visibility, set the tone of what we're trying to do, and allow the community to know, hey, there's something coming. It's not going to build itself. And if you want to participate,
right,
here we are. Yeah. Raise your hand, hit the DMs, send us an email, call the phone line, whatever it is. Like, this is meant to be a platform, and it will look like what we all put on the airwaves. That's the idea.
Right.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Wait. No, I feel like 1FM is like a nice evolution, because with what Dub Lab was doing with internet radio,
pioneers,
that's so impressive. And I actually like did a little search crawl, and you guys have a mix on there from two.
Yeah.
How did you get in touch with Maria?
Maria, Pasha, and I have been friends for some time.
Okay.
Maria often comes in for movement. We met at one of the parties we did at Simplified, one of the barbecues that we were every year, and hit it off and just like really connected and stayed in touch for a couple of years. And then, we were in LA playing a show, and we're like, hey, what's up? You know, how you doing? Whatever. She's like, my show is on while you're in town. Do you guys want to come guest? I was like, absolutely. 1000%. And I mean, such an honor. Such an honor.
Right.
But radio is such an interesting. Okay, and so really the very first thing I ever wanted to do growing up was to be a radio DJ. I was obsessed with the voices on the radio.
Yeah.
So obsessed, because you never know who's behind that voice.
That and, back in the day, it was a lot more mysterious, like how radio worked, who was actually hosting those things. And like, I would listen to radio late into the night because I was working on a painting or whatever at school. And I'm like, okay, so WRCJ for some reason has a very sleepy radio set at 4 a.m., but the jazz helps me. Yeah. So then I was like, okay. But even then, you mentioned that you wanted to be one since you were very young. To be honest, and as a disclosure, I started a teenage podcast, Automatic, back in like 2007.
Wow.
What?
And early. That's Joe Rogan early on.
That's what I'm saying. Like, Podomatic is no longer the platform that it used to be. But when I was on it, it was really prior to Tumblr era.
Yeah.
The only efforts that I had were making very shitty graphics on Microsoft Paint. Then, once I got into college, I was able to actually go to shows and get real photos from actual events and things. But prior to that time, I was just listening to a bunch of random tracks from some actual music critics that would rate albums that were coming out of the indie scene at the time.
Was this on Winamp? Or you?
Yes, I also did Winamp for a little bit, but for me, Podomatic was me with Audacity, the free program, recording with a mic in my parents' house.
What was it about?
It was specifically about up-and-coming music that I really liked because I really enjoyed college radio, and nobody in my age group, cared about what was happening with the Strokes or any of the other bands that were happening at that time.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, okay, I'm going to make a podcast, which only had at its peak 42 listeners.
Wow.
But I really liked it because it gave me control over something that I didn't really feel like I had a voice in sharing.
Yeah.
It's also very personal because I'd also get my hand into some graphics and things. And then I would do a little research about the artist in question. So I'll be like, hey, you've reached this podcast mix, and we're going to talk about Visual K because I've been a fan since I was like a wee teen. And so we would go through a discography, and I would explain everything that happened with that artist and then play I think 3 or 4 tracks from them. So it was a good 20 to 30 minutes.
That's a young Danny.
It was very amateur, but I love the fact that you actually wanted to be in radio for a long time, because I did too, and I imitated voices that I would listen to online as well.
Which says a lot. I feel like when we have these aspirations when we're young to do said thing, and whether we actually get down that tunnel, whether or not we veer, at the end of the day, those foundational desires a lot of the times help to build where we are going in what direction, right? So tell us, like, why did you want to do that? And then how did that also segue into your stepping stones into being who you are right now?
Yeah, man, that's deep. I mean,
that's what we do here, ask deep questions.
So I loved the radio. I was obsessed with the voices on the radio. I loved when they were like just saying what song it was. I would go to the library and print off what they played that week. Like I'd print off the 25 cents a page at the library because I wanted to know what music's playing.
Whoa.
And then I lost my dad when I was 14. And going through his stuff, I found his camera.
Oh.
He had a 1960 Minolta SRT 101. And I don't know, I just was like drawn to it. I'd never taken a picture before. Really, I don't know, it just felt like a way to connect with him and have something of his that I could like just have. I don't know, just like it spoke to me. And that was like minute number one of me being like a creator. You know, like that was like, okay, I can point this at something and turn it into something.
Your father's was such the same thing.
Yeah.
That's like a channel.
Yeah, 100%. It was just a cool, I don't know, I just thought it looked cool too, you know, like on top of that. But that was minute one of me as a creative person. What I learned, you know, flash forward the first 10 years of my career, you know, or from being 14 to 24 and primarily studying photography, pursuing photography, and doing design also. Like that was a skill set that I started to develop with like my Windows 3.1 type.
Not 3.1.
Yeah.
So I always had that. And, you know, to my credit, my dad was a techie person. And he was always buying computer gadgets, and like he had a scanner. You could like scan stuff with your hand. Like he just always had stuff. I'm that way too. I love things. And I like gear and making things. And so that, you know, taking this thing that you have and then turning it into something. You know, my dad would make brochures for his business and like, you know, tinkering.
So entrepreneurial spirit, which we love here on this podcast.
And my parents were self-employed, so like they worked together, they collaborated on their business. Like, so the entrepreneurial mindset, I think, was always there for me. You know, even I think Ash and I worked together. That was a model for me. You know, being able to have like a long-term collaborator traveling the country. I think about them when we travel the country playing shows. You know, being in the car for long stretches, like
that has to be like your ride or die kind of person. And 100%. I feel like if you're traveling all the time, how has that been? Because one of the questions I have on this long doc here, but I actually still want to ask is, you know, you started out with this prestige of all these art influences. What really appealed to me initially was that Hot to Death was like the coolest party for artsy folks, because you would look at a flyer and go, wow, I know that album reference. Or you'd be like, I don't know it, but let me look for this now in reverse image. How do you feel about that, like, quote unquote, what Ash is called art ho approach?
I mean,
and what does that happen to do for you when you go and travel? Because I think that's the thing, is like, it's a brand now. It's like a specific movement, right? As a project.
All that is lovely to hear. And I think in the beginning, we kind of had the grandiose faux pas of even thinking that we could do something like that. I don't think either of us ever thought we'd be doing this for almost 17 years now. That's where we're at now. But we did have the idea that we could build, you know, from the very beginning. Honestly, Hot to Death is a conversation. You know, it's been an ongoing container for our inspirations and the things that we just getting energized by.
Right.
You know? And so in the early years, There's definitely kind of like a punk and maybe more of a goth vibe. Always inspired by Warhol's factory more so than like his art per se. Like the ecosystem, the dance floor, the people coming together was always a lot more intriguing to me than even being a DJ. We didn't call ourselves DJs for the first few years because it felt like we didn't DJ until our very first party. That was our first time DJing. It was our very first party. You know, and like Detroit has always been an epicenter for music,
Right.
and particularly dance music.
Mhm.
That wasn't necessarily like the lineage that we were coming from in the beginning. Like we obviously are deeply engaged with that narrative, deeply knowledgeable, and continuously schooling ourselves on the deep history and the deep well and the shoulders that we stand on and all that stuff. That's not necessarily where we came from. We were almost kind of like maybe a little punk against it in the beginning. Like we kind of had this term like anti-DJ in the beginning, but it was largely not anti in context of like house or techno, but like.
But the mentality of the DJ scene as a business model, because I think even in interviews that you've had with like the Metro Times, you mentioned that we're a little too nightlifey for the art world, but we're a little too artsy for nightlife.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really cool because that's the niche that you fulfill for a lot of venues that choose to book you is okay, so they're not just a DJ set. They're not just a traveling like event with, the same kind of fanfare. They bring an air of like art to it. And not only that, they also capture it over the years, which I think is really beautiful, honestly.
Community.
Yeah.
Community. I like, individuals that are on a regular,
Mhm.
constantly going. And I'm always looking for the flyer to figure out where it's going to be at next.
Exactly.
Which is somewhat leading to what my question is going to be next. But let me piggyback on something that you had said. Shoulders that you're standing.
Yeah.
Whose shoulders are you standing on? And do they know that you're standing on their shoulders? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the shoulders we stand on locally are definitely, I would say that in our early years, there's a party called Dorkwave. That was kind of like where we cut our teeth, is like learning a certain spirit, and that included DJs like Mike Servito and Derek Pleslako and a litany of other. It was just like a collective of DJs, some of which are very famous now, but like that was where we sort of got the bug, And then I think another shoulder we stand on is adult. Adam and Nicola have been deep inspirations to Ash and I from the very beginning, and that sort of kind of aesthetics and sound and vision all sort of culminating into a project that can be art, that can also be music, that can be in the clubs, that can also be in the museum. That's a major one that we stand on top of. And of course, there's, a lineage of nightlife here that this would be a 10-hour podcast. Stories like Club Heaven, which was sort of like Detroit's Paradise Garage. Ken Collier was the DJ there.
I'm thinking about the VHS clips or that have been uploaded onto YouTube of the old Detroit party scene.
Yeah,
and there was the show.
There's another great little pocket if you're listening and looking for a great little YouTube rabbit hole to get into. Is called Back Porch Video. It was a public access from Dearborn High School in the 80s, and it was sort of like their MTV, but run by a bunch of teenagers. And some of them were new wavers, some of them were punks, but they booked shows in the back room of this TV station that hosted them. And Black Flag and Minor Threat and Danzig and all of the Detroit hardcore negative approach and the likes. Like, so there's that, in some ways that's like a shoulder we stand on. It's just like another inspiration.
I love it.
There's just so much here, and I think also like there's inspirations and people we appreciate and respect who aren't necessarily like our heroes. Or heroes isn't the right word, but like our immediate references. They aren't the ones that are on our mood board, which I think has set us apart. There is, full respect to underground resistance. I love underground resistance. The message, the music, the whole ecosystem. They weren't necessarily a creative influence. which is a controversial thing to say from being from Detroit or whatever. And but it, those weren't the references that we started with. For us, things like Fiorushi, as a fashion label and as a visual brand that was always shape-shifting and changing, collaborating with nightlife, collaborating with musicians, collaborating with like across the creative spectrum. That's always been sort of our MO.
Yeah, I mean, again, I truly think promoting is an art, right? And you guys do it so well, but you've been doing it for over a decade. That's also like a kudos to how insane that is.
Yeah, and nightlife itself, I think, we started this as an art project, which sounds really pretentious, but that is what we started this out as. Like, in some ways, spiritual, like we're artists, we're throwing a party, so this is our art. In some ways, a little more pragmatic. Like, I came back from New York and started, I was in New York for a couple of years finishing school. I came back here, and this is when Ash and I started this collaboration. And I had experienced the New York art world with the capital A and the capital W, and gotten a real taste of a sort of elite sphere of it, and came back and realized Detroit is just such a different ecosystem.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, a lot better ecosystem, because you are more free to do what you want. And the idea that it was very unlikely for us at that point to be putting things on the wall and having it be more than just a self-expression or a community asset, which is also obviously very important. But during the question of like, how can we be creative and then make our art for $5 a piece, i.e., what you paid to get into our party? Right.
I didn't think about it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, like, so, I grew up in an entrepreneurial home. Art and commerce have always sat in the same table in my life and in my brain.
Which is a unique environment to grow up in. Everything that you do is usually based upon inspiration, and then you have to fund it, and then you have to push it, and you have to pedal it, and then you have to make sure that that you're bringing together your community to ensure that that's made possible. I also come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad is an entrepreneur, runs a family business. I took over where I'm at right now, running my family's printing company, and my mom the same. Like, I feel like part of it is like, of course, being in the home. But then there's also things that's just like mental, like things that just come along with just like your genes. Even if your parents didn't, encourage you to do it, you probably would have found it anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure. And
That's
parents,
definitely true.
My parents were very encouraging.
That's what's up.
I'm very lucky to have the upbringing that I did have. I lost my parents young too, so it's like that's also shaped the commitment that I've had to living a creative life. Because
tomorrow is not promised.
Tomorrow's not promised. And I feel like they set me up. Like, not. I had a very middle class upbringing, and towards the end of things, it wasn't so great. We had our ups and downs, as all entrepreneurs do. But that was the model that I absorbed from them. Right before my dad passed, he was nominated to run for mayor of my small town. I grew up in South. So yeah, and that town was good to me. But like, that was the kind of figure that I had for being a community leader, bringing people together. I'm grateful for that. Even thinking about things at sort of a city level. He was on city council for a long time.
And he served.
He served, and he was on this board and that board and Cub Scouts, and I'm very grateful for the foundation and the modeling and the experiences that I got to have. We're recording this on Mother's Day.
Yes,
and
Mother's Day.
My mom, she was like, "Oh, I want you to be a journalist. Like, I hope you be a photojournalist."
That's so great.
That was kind of her dream for me, And as I'm moving into like the radio station and other media projects as well, I think about what she wanted me to do, and I think about Detroit through our dance floor and through other things that I'm involved in. I do think about her wanting that for me. So it feels
it's very full circle. It's like, for me, I don't necessarily think in the moment that I'm doing anything important or that it's actually cool, and then I mention it to someone. Suddenly it's like, you did that, you like captured that, or I'm sure you get the same thing where you run into people in town and they're like, you're part of this. Chances are they've been going to Hot to Death for years and they don't actually really know you, the person.
Sometimes,
They just kind of go, that's the person. And for me, there's the question of, like, you mentioned cultural solidarity and how that plays into events in Detroit and what you're trying to cultivate in the community.
Yeah, the solidarity thing is really important to me. And this goes back to what I said earlier. It's like the hotbed narrative in Detroit has been on the tip of everybody's tongue for almost 20 years. And that narrative has changed a lot in the city. It has changed how people think about things.
Right.
And when their way that they think about the city has changed, changed what they do. They invest in things they support.
Exactly.
You know? So that narrative has done a lot for the city. How much of that narrative, what has that done for creators?
Right.
How many people, who you run into at a family gathering, or they hear about some headline or whatever the new thing is that's in the news media about Detroit, and it's creative hotbed. Very few of the people who could recite that sort of climate here, cultural system, could point to any of the artists or the people or the places or projects that underwrite that narrative.
Right. Yeah.
It is a hotbed. There is a lot of stuff happening here. But we're kind of an underground town.
Right.
Where we have a sort of a very pure, actually, in some ways. Like, I would say there's the flip side of the coin is it's hard to find. The other side of the coin is that it's really pure. People start projects here because they're inspired. Comparatively, to like when I think about my time in New York, people be like making their merch and reaching out to their PR contact before they even wrote the song or booked a show. You know what I mean? So there's always like, oh, I know, but this person, like, you would make such a great band.
It's a commercialization that feels very different. And sometimes, especially if I go somewhere like in LA or whatever, because in advertising, it's very much, are you in LA? Are you in LA? And the conversation I get from it is like, oh, you're in Detroit. That must be so cool. Like, there's so much cool stuff happening out of Detroit. And I then kind of pointedly ask them, like, what cool thing? Right. Because I want to know what their talking points are. Chances are it's just the stuff that you see on the news or the stuff that you see from mainstream publications, because they haven't actually talked to an artist who's from here. And it's not, no fault of their exposure. It's just like, where do we come in and say, hey, this is who we are.
Yeah.
This is what we want to say. And we're not editing it down for a soundbite. We're not trying to get somebody to like us, which is a big thing about Detroit. When I went to school here, it's like the attitude that Detroiters have. Y'all don't mess around.
Yeah.
And even now, people will be like, oh, you've been here for like, over a decade. Aren't you a Detroiter? And I'm like, I'm a new Detroiter. Like, prior to that time, prior to the millennium, there are some people that I would definitely see as just, the masters of their craft. That I would never claim to be a part of Detroit in that way, because I think we already know that people have been about it here.
Yeah.
In fact, we've had such a rich history that very few people realize how you are, 6 degrees of separation from someone cool in other places around the world.
Yeah.
But we have like 1 degree of separation?
You meet someone, you're never going to stop seeing them for the rest of your time.
Oh my God.
You may have crossed paths for like 10 full years and never said hi or got introduced, but then once you
the algorithm.
I don't know, an algorithm.
It feels like that.
It's a social network that I think.
You touched on something I actually want to talk on for a moment, which is there's so much, it's so loaded to call yourself a Detroiter.
Yeah.
We're a very proud city. People love it, which they should. We're very concerned about who is and who isn't a Detroiter. When you start to become, am I a Detroiter? I didn't grow up here, but I've been here for 20 years. Do I, there's no,
who's the one that's
it's a fool's errand to actually really define it. And I say that full disclosure of being pissed off of like, who's this motherfucker? What's the, I fall victim to
the street cred argument.
Right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. So when your question about the cultural city, it doesn't matter. Like, we need to have a realization that a lot has changed in the city based on the power that the perception of Detroit being a creative place has created. If you're creative, you're trying to do something here, Doesn't matter if you've been here for 3 months or 30 years. You know, like, come here, participate, respect the people that are here that have been investing, that have created the foundation. Right. But like, we have more to gain by working together.
Be egoless in that sense,
than we do trying to carve our little pockets or our little niche, or to win at this or win at that.
Very frustrating sometimes, because I feel like I've had that conversation so much in the past, probably just like 5 years alone, actually, more so than before, because I think the pandemic forced me to be introspective about, what are you doing here? Why are you here? You're working remotely right now. Could you be anywhere else? What is the impetus for you to stay and continue to cultivate the relationships that you have to be creative? Like, the aspirations of you and Ash, Hot to Death, like, where do you want to go? Like, where do you see that going?
Well,
very broad question.
I'll dovetail it with this idea of Hot to Death also is a piece of social infrastructure. You know, like, I look at our photos, we're putting the archive, so I've shot every one of our parties throughout almost 17 years now. And right now we're migrating the archive, re-exporting, because, you know, the early days we were posting on MySpace, migrating to our website where the archive lives. And I just see, here's this person. I didn't even know they were coming out back then, but look where they're at now. They're, you know, touring and doing this cool thing, or they work for so-and-so, or they built this brand, or they have this restaurant, or they, you know, all these different things. You never know who's coming through your dance floor. But there aren't very many places in culture where you can go just randomly talk to somebody, or dance with somebody, or meet through a friend. The third space conversation. I think it's actually even like, third space. And it's like, the power of nightlife is that the first demand is that you show up and bring yourself, whatever that is. The lights are off for the day. You don't have to be a certain person to your boss, or to your family, or to whoever it is that, you know, you sort of modify yourself to be in the different identities that we carry throughout life. Nightlife is supposed to be the place where you show up fully yourself. You know, and that, you know, our first slogan was show up, look good, and dance. And like, showing up, obviously, please come. And look good was really about that, like, self-expression. You know, even, you know, the name Haute to Death, like, haute couture is the highest level of self-expression. One piece for one person, you know, and death is inescapable. So like, this idea of being the most you can be has always been sort of embedded in the proposition of coming to our party. And so when I think about the future, we've got almost 20 years of Detroit's creative ecosystem documented on our dance floor, trusting us to be part of this, like, community asset thing, this third space where, you know, another friend of mine was like, oh, you know, whenever I need work, I just go out. If I need to find something to do, I'm struggling, I need to pay rent, whatever, I just go to a party. You go and you meet your, you know, someone out there has got something, needs something, is doing something, and you know, that's what social infrastructure is. So when I think about cultural solidarity, I really think about, how do we, as cultural creators, convert our cultural capital, this buzz, this narrative, this thing that is known about the city, into equity for ourselves? How do you convert your cultural capital into equity? This is a question that really drives everything that I do. 100%. And so it's like, Hot to Death is social infrastructure for us to meet and to build a sense of cultural intelligence, collective intelligence, you know, collective effervescence. We share spirit, you know, you're sitting next to somebody and they're like losing it on the dance floor. You're going to have a lot easier time losing yourself, or feeling empowered yourself to connect in that. You know, like, our emotions are contagious. And the people around you and music control our emotions. So there's this whole spiritual kind of chain of events that happens in nightlife when it's done the right way. And when people are in the right headspace and sharing a sense of generosity, or spirit of generosity, you know, and then you leave feeling a lot better than you did when you came in, ideally. and you feel, oh, I got to bring my full self. I got to, bring your identity in a way that the rest of the world might not be ready for yet.
Right.
You got to sort of practice that. And then eventually you are just that.
Yes.
And your career takes off, or your things, whatever it is, you find your people.
You know what I really do? I concur with you 1,000%, because I feel like especially when I go to your parties, I like leave everything in the car. And then bringing your full self is something that, as a woman who came out as a queer individual, 3 years ago? Prior to that, I was never comfortable in spaces because I couldn't find my tribe, because I was still trying to find who I was and whether or not this is the direction that I wanted to, pursue, and is this who I wanted to be presented as. And the moment of me coming out I had a lot of labor pains. My goodness, I did. And I felt like once I did, I was able to get more connected and free flow into spaces that were accepting of me. And when I say me, I don't just mean Elizabeth Mays, but I mean accepting of the queer individual or the artistic individual or the entrepreneurial individual or anyone who wants to vibe, have a good time, listen to amazing music, and be amongst individuals that make them feel
alive.
Worthy and alive.
Yeah.
So when
reaching your potential.
Reaching
we all
your
have
potential.
So this everyone has a lot of potential.
Yes.
They might not be there yet. I've seen people who are like, yo, what are you doing? Like, pull it together, or like whatever it is. And then flash forward, they find something. They find that place that unlocks, So I think as a piece of social infrastructure, you're creating a space like that's a mechanism, a tool. It's a machine that is this collective nightlife, spiritual kind of thing that helps people reach their potential.
Right.
And it's not everybody's way of doing it, but if that's for you, this is our space for you. You know what I mean? And I've had multiple stories of people who have confided in me. I came out and I brought my parents to your party after I came out, and they were like accepting of that person. He brought his parents.
Like they got to
the
see
space
who
where
he
he kind of like
his outlet,
brought himself there. Both gotten out of abusive relationships. People have just had a shitty week and then like let it out. This is just a space that we need as humans, and so that's been part of what we've built. So that's like one piece of the infrastructure. And we talk about I'm connecting this to the where is this all going kind of narrative. It's like the radio station, for example, that next sort of platform up where not that everyone on the station needs to be attached to Hot to Death, but it's like there is so much of my social universe has come from that.
Right.
And a lot of the people who've gravitated to what I've found so far, are in and around the ecosystem. And so it's like I want to create more of a platform to amplify the voices, amplify the creative projects, the ideas, and the personalities and perspectives, coming out of here. So I really am bullish on creating more and more and more opportunities for exactly that. And the radio station, what I found, is really sort of the first chapter to a first stepping stone in a bigger effort to do exactly that. And I'll leave that there for now, because literally I got to launch the station first.
Right.
But, that's how and why I think about why these projects are important and what they're building towards. Because at the end of the day, it's like Detroit is going to keep growing.
Yes.
There's construction literally in every direction. We need to make ourselves visible. We need to be interconnected enough so that, when the moment is, or we create these moments, to be able to make being creative in Detroit a more economic viable ecosystem. I really just think that there's so much we can be doing together to be able to make another movement festival, capitalize on the NFL draft. The NFL draft thing just happened. I went off on my Instagram for 3 days in a row about it because I felt like it was a missed opportunity for Detroit to fly its freak flag with all of these motherfuckers in town.
Right.
And
I listened to it.
I appreciated the IG stories because I had some thoughts and then I deleted some thoughts and then I sent some more thoughts in. And then I thought about it and I was like, well, ultimately, because I was inside the machine, I was inside the beast before. And now I'm pretty much just freelancing, looking for other types of gigs in the brand strategy space. And also as a designer, I realized this is a very corporate project. Immediately, the reason why that they've chosen these artists or these photographers to cover the event is because they wanted to have a corporate shine for their partnership to promote the sports fans in that space. However, corralling everyone within an even smaller footprint than the 7.2 square miles that is the city seems like a completely missed bag because you've got so many pockets and neighborhoods that have their own unique feels and vibes, and then also all of those businesses, the restaurants, the bars, the clubs, all of the shops, the retail that you could involve in that space wasn't involved in that planning.
If we were doing what I think we should be doing in terms of like what cultural solidarity, like there should have been an independent full program that was marketed and promoted to sports fans that were going to be in town and looking for something to do after. That was a missed opportunity. On one hand, would it have been nice for the NFL or the city or whoever, the different litany of orgs, to tap some group to kind of fill that void? That would be nice.
Yeah. Right.
But I also don't trust them to have the vision or the curatorial kind of prowess or knowledge to make it kind of cool. Yeah. And so that's why I kind of really, in that video, I said the onus is on us to organize, put our heads together, to share resources, to, if I were going to sort of say, NFL, I don't know if the NFL draft comes back. I don't know much about
sports ball. What?
I actually like watching football. I don't know anything about it. I like sports. I'm not like
right. But when something big like that again, you want to be able to organize and have something ready.
Or if we have another event, that comes back to the city of Detroit.
100%. There's going
just
to
in
be.
general, it's like how do we actually get equipped and prepared for that because we get the knowledge of the year before.
Right.
And I definitely do believe that much more could have been done, especially spreading out just outside of just the downtown area and really immersing themselves in other keys and even just the culture of what it is that Detroit really is all about, which is creative.
That is the place where I think the Venn diagram of we are creators and we're trying to secure the bag, and the city is like, oh, Detroit is creative and we're trying to secure the bag. Like that tourism space is actually the filet mignon of that sort of overlap because, with very little support, I mean, there is support for culture here, but compared to all the pure Michigan stuff and, the downtown stuff and hiking, biking, hunting, fishing, like arts tourism does more for the city than any of the other stuff combined. 18% of our state dollars all come from culture, which is the largest piece of the pie. And so what does it look like if we do a little bit more to that can look like a lot of different things. But ultimately, I think it should be independently organized, maybe subsidized by the state, but with a very uncompromised vision. Detroit's freaky. Detroit is not for the faint of heart. Detroit is has a lot of different flavors, and like we ought to be acting those unique flavors rather than the tendency that I've noticed, which is to try and dress it up a little bit to make it look like how they do it in New York, how they do it in LA, how they do it during our Basel,
we have our own
South by Southwest. No, we got our own thing and we need to stick to it. Like it might not look like what people are expecting, and that's the point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also the uniqueness of it, right? It's like, 100%. What is it about Detroit that keeps you coming back? And in a lot of ways, the conversation I used to have, because Elizabeth and I went to the CCS opening for like the student show. They have up until the 22nd of May. If you do check it out, it's free now after the opening night. She and I talked about just the talent that came through the door and all the spaces and all the students that are creating and getting excited about potential work and projects and stuff. And, the difference now is that there's opportunity. You see, even in the show itself, there are multiple sponsors or corporations investing in that talent with projects or just curriculum as where we were a couple years ago. you graduated from CCS and you were told to disperse. You were told to go find your work elsewhere because it wasn't worth staying here and you could always come back here. And I felt like that was a backhanded compliment because it was like, you'll definitely find something, but if you go out and you come back, you'll be better. And I'm like, I understand what you're saying because everyone has to have an experience and be well-rounded and well-traveled, but you're saying it in a way that completely disses where I live, and that's not cool. Exactly.
Yeah. So, and to kind of segue to another direction, you got more programs and more.
Show us the plug. What's going on?
Like, there's something that's going to be happening in like what 1.75 weeks.
Movement weekend.
Yes.
Is closing in, and that is obviously, at least for our line of work, the Christmas.
The Christmas. Tell us what you got going on.
Yeah, so this is the third year we've done a party called Cruise Control.
Mm-hmm.
It's the largest event we produce throughout the year. The first year was a collaboration with Portage Garage record label. Last year was a collaboration with Smart Bar, and this year it's us. We're carrying the whole thing.
That's great.
Yeah, that was sort of an intention. You know, those collaborators were great, and I'm super happy with how those years went. Ash and I like our vision. We like having things our way. Not to say that we didn't have good collaborations with other people we made it with, but it ended up being sort of this thing that I don't know, like, so Cruise Control.
Is it a breakthrough moment for you now that you're like owning the entire thing versus having a collaborator?
It's has allowed us to, especially in the program, the DJs that we book, it's fully like a hot to death booking.
That's great.
And it's I always kind of describe what we do with Cruise Control as like friends and heroes.
Okay.
You know, so there are people on the lineup who are absolutely like bucket list bookings for us. Juan McLean, Marie Davidson is doing a live set. It's her only live set in North American tour, as far as I can tell.
What?
Yeah. Man Foxman, Creatures was a track that we opened almost every one of our sets with for a few years. You know, that's what movement allows us to do. It gives us the sort of space and the audience to really like flex, and that's what we do. And from a creative vision, you know, like the party has a sort of kind of queering culture in a way. Like Cruise Control is like there's an automotive theme to each year with the promotion, you know, and it kind of combines sort of Xeroxy texture kind of aesthetic that we are used to doing in our regular art direction applied to this like aesthetic. So the first year, the logo for it was a woman's hand with like bright yellow acrylic nails holding a wrench. And the second year was a woman's hand with bright acrylic yellow nails holding the rear view mirror, like looking behind her with these like sort of yellow center line.
For those who don't know, just to interject, Movement is a festival in Detroit that's been going on for a long time, and you guys have been there for the past 3 years.
This party we've done for 3 years, which is what we picked up after the pandemic. We've been doing after parties almost the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's something else to kind of touch on is the fact that it's not so much that you guys are a standalone effort, is that you guys are part of an existing effort that has been going on in the city to promote music and artists to come gather and have fun and express themselves. But I feel like if I said, oh, I'm going to Movement, people are like, okay. But if I said, oh, I'm going to Hot to Death, they're like completely intrigued, enamored by the idea of it because it's so much more curative, and it's also, it doesn't mean to be exclusive at all, but it feels very enigmatic in that way because it comes off as exclusive, even though it's not. I don't know if that's a compliment, but it's like it's accessible, but it doesn't feel accessible at the same time because you present it in a way that feels very, very polished, and it has a step above what a typical music festival or typical party promotes.
Yeah. Ash has a line that we're exclusive for anyone that wants. You know,
that's great.
Like,
great.
And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about inclusivity,
Mm-hmm.
because the language and inclusivity, including people, has also been in some ways co-opted.
Right.
I think in some ways there are people who know the right things to say,
Mm-hmm.
which is a step in the right direction. Now, I'm not saying that people don't take inclusivity or safety or these types of things seriously. I think a lot of people do. I think there's a tendency to copycat, to copy and paste, say, an inclusivity statement. I'm glad a lot of parties have inclusivity statements now.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I have also seen parties, I'm not going to name names,
Mm-hmm.
where like there's also Blue Lives Matter stripe on their security team out front, in front of their inclusivity statement. And those the politics of one doesn't necessarily line up with the politics of the other. It's not to say it wasn't a good security team or that anybody was endangered, blah,
right.
blah, blah. But there's, to me, in that instance, I saw that and I felt like you're copy and pasting the ideology. You're not necessarily internalizing it. And whatever, again, step in the right direction. Also, like, I don't care, bring the normies. Like, if they're
That's
in
the
the
thing
right
is,
spirit and
I've
are
never
coming
felt
from the right place, and there's a lot of people who come to our party who maybe don't look underground.
Right. I've never felt out of place at a
And
Hot to Death party.
I also notice a lot of people out there who don't have the privilege of being outwardly artsy and queer and aggressive or whatever. Like, they might have family and kids and they're on the DL, or maybe they're just like cool music but aren't art damaged enough where they have to like look artsy to be also cued into good music. It's just music. Like, come as you are. Come as you are. And so whatever, inclusivity, I think, is like sometimes
it's more than a buzzword,
leveraged to be exclusive. I don't know how controversial that sounds or whatever, but it is like something I've observed. So I think as people in nightlife, we need to interrogate that, because at the end of the day, like, if your inclusivity statement and the safety statement and you have harm reduction things, and then somebody needs harm reduction, are the people in the space trained to do harm reduction?
Exactly.
Is there, this is the other thing that I think, this isn't even what you asked, but it's like important, I think, in nightlife. It's like safety is a community effort, for everyone that has like an ACAB tag under their belt. How many of them then expect there to be a security team that's going to look out for them? Which, security team is super important. Also, like, we need to look out for each other. 100%. The only way we're all going to be safer in the club or in our communities or anywhere else that matter is being able to look out for each other. And that might just be like, hey, I see someone that is not doing so hot. Maybe I'll go find them a glass of water.
I was party mom.
Party mom, like, just party person. Like, that's how we should be approaching. I think there's a line from when we started to where we are, where in the art ho era, the art damaged East Lee's era, as they're calling it now, like, there was a real like edgy, let's get fucked up, Blurry Nights kind of Sparks energy drink, like, if there's a mascot for that ethos, it would be Sparks energy drink. That ethos, I think, was a lot more prevalent in the early 2000s and 2010s. And now I think we're coming around, especially Gen Z, is understanding the more spiritual quality of life aspects of nightlife and music and community. Like, community really is like, for as much as it's a buzzword, it is actually like the movement that came out of Gen Z, I think, in some ways, or is like developing in Gen Z. And I'm really heartened by that, because Ash and I have always felt that the community aspect of nightlife is why we got into it, more so than being DJs or like seen as cool, blah, 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 all that stuff. And it is cool. Like, DJing is fun. I love it. It's like a really deep part of my creative practice.
Right, but you're not like wearing a giant marshmallow. Sorry, marshmallow. But it's like it's no longer a cult of personality so much as it's a space where it's safe to do what you want within reason, as long as it's safe to others. And I agree with you. Like Gen Z has definitely pushed that forward.
Yeah.
But I would argue some of us, millennials and more, have also felt like we are finally free enough to say, hey, we should have these space requirements, or hey, we do have the means to source this kind of safety. Being more like the elder in the room to say, this is super cool. Make sure you do this, this, and this. Make sure you're like all the things that matter to us matter to them, and that feels very different.
Of a healthy and a safe space.
Yeah. We're also all like, at the age of like professional therapy now.
Also we gotta wake up and, just understanding the whole process of that. We're there to have We're there to meet someone new. We're there to let loose. We're there to enjoy ourselves. And if that means we're gonna have a little bit of alcohol or whatever it is, like we're gonna have a good time.
Yeah.
But we also want to do it responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want a little segue in here about towards the end of our show. Is that we always want to give you the plug. We do. So feel free to share with us what you got coming up and where we can find you on the internet, wherever.
And how you want them to find you too.
Well, May 24th, Friday, the sort of opening night of the movement weekend. Ash and I are doing cruise control at Marble Bar. Incredibly stacked lineup. Juan McLean, Command Foxman, Marie Davidson, De La Vega, who's a homie from Atlanta, throws the best, most fun parties in Atlanta. Ellie Escobar, who also throws the most fun parties in New York. Katie Like, a homie, Ash and I actually think I'm missing some, but you have to check it out. That's our Friday night. It's cute, it's fun, it's the kickoff, and that's kind of how we position the vibe for that night. There's a lot of things to explore and experience that weekend.
What time does it start?
Starts at 7, I believe.
7, okay.
Cool.
It goes till 4 or 5.
That's late. That's late for a Detroit party.
Where we actually are open past 2 a.m. And I think one time I found a spotlight or wherever I was, and it was all night. And I was just like, wow.
And we do everyone a favor of not going all night. There's Saturday and Sunday and Monday. Yeah. So everyone's still cute. Their outfits are clean. They're probably showered. They're like, still on the it's just starting. Like you're just, the wave is just starting to crest. We like to get people set off, right? But so cruise control, Friday the 24th. You can find Hot to Death at Hot to Death, HAUTETOD, Instagram and every other social. But Instagram's our main one. You'll find our links to our mixes and our art and everything. And our website, H2D.
So H2D.
H2dsocial.club. It has all of your archive photos. And
we
the
didn't
little
really get to talk about the art, but you know what? A podcast about art, just go look at the art. We don't need to talk about it. I have on the website, there's actually an archive of all of our photos as well as all of the record cover posters every month. There's over 140 of them. Every month we redesign a record cover, as Danny mentioned earlier. So the entire archive is on there, as well as a handful of videos I've made about different the process videos that I've made about the creation of something. There's a whole wealth of, if you're really in it for the rabbit hole, H2D social.club would be the rabbit hole.
Oh my God.
Down that rabbit.
Please go down that rabbit hole. Make sure you follow, subscribe, like everything. Because the rotation of content that you guys put out and the events that you put out is something worth following and attending and sharing and liking. And just understanding that this is one of the most essential communities events that is actually happening and continuously happening. I'm very proud to have you on the show.
Thanks for coming in, John.
Thank you for physically coming in. And allowing us to interview you and to really deep dive more into you in the practice. And I know Ash couldn't be here, but I feel like you are summing up everything that she probably would have said as well. Peace and blessings, and thank you so much everyone for listening. Like you said, go to the website, go to the Instagram, follow, like, subscribe, show up, and have an amazing time. That's all we want.
More episodes, please check us out at the Creative Voice Pod. That is on Instagram, just as the Creative Voice Pod. You can also email us for any questions, thoughts, or possible guests at thecreativevoicepod@gmail.com. And then, we also have a Spotify channel for all of our episodes. But feel free to check us out, give us a listen, and we'll see you later.
And our Spotify handle is the TCB Pod.
Yep.
All right. Over and out.
Bye.
Peace.